You know, it's so important that employees see what their connection is to your success as a business, your success as a community, and so forth. I mentioned in our program yesterday that I will never forget one time doing a huge training for a group of banks, and it was mostly frontline folks, and in answer to a question, a young lady said, well, I'm just a teller. And I was like, oh, you know, you're just a teller. I mean, think about it, in a bank, that's like 80-90% of the contacts, physical, in-person contacts that customers have with that organization. So that person, whether they be a housekeeper at your hotel or a secretary at the front office, they may actually have more to do with the impression of your business than the person in the, quote, ivory tower. And so what do we do on a regular basis to really let that person know how important they are to our success as an organization? And then another thing, being so important is soliciting their input. Now, when it comes to customer service, you can imagine that is absolutely critical, because who do customers voice their concerns to? Do they most often call the CEO? No. They will say it to a frontline person who probably has no control over it. And as we discussed in our training yesterday, that's called an institutional complaint. And as managers, we better be taking that feedback, soliciting it from our employees, but maybe providing them with a formalized way of putting that to us. Because you know how it is, some folks, they have no problem at all. If you think of your staff, some people have no problem at all telling you exactly what you should be doing all the time. And then there are the other ones who are much more quiet and private. And you know what? They're the thinkers. Maybe they're the ones that we really need to solicit and really extract. What are they finding out? And then finally, as we discussed, the recognition and the appreciation of those employees will lead to definite business results. And a question that I always have for managers, particularly in the customer service realm, is make sure the light bulb is plugged into the right lane. You know what I mean? I mean, a lot of times I go to observe at a business, and I find even in a training, and I'll ask folks, what their responsibility is in the organization. And there'll be this just vivacious and, fantastic personality, and I'll ask them, what do they do? Oh, well, I'm in bookkeeping. And I'm like, oh, you're kidding. But when do you talk to customers? Oh, I hardly ever talk to customers. And then I have someone else like sitting in the back room like this, and they're the main customer contact person, and I'm just like, oh, wow, So people have different natural strengths and abilities, and yes, I believe we can improve those through training. But would you agree that there are just some innate people skills that people have or don't have? And so we want to make sure in our organization that we have identified and helped people to be in the best place for them, but also the best place for our business success. You might remember that show years ago that was on the Lady in the Dark trench coat called The Weakest Link. And I can assure you that the one thing that I see service-wise is that a business is only as strong as their weakest link. Because unfortunately, Americans in particular, our mind goes to the worst things. So if someone even has one bad experience with one person, we just quite frankly can't afford that. So if you find that someone is not projecting what it is that you want to be as a brand, I'm not saying to get rid of them, because I think it's probably just, again, because they were not in the right place in your organization. So perhaps just switching things around a bit, but making sure that those links are strong so that it can lead to your business success. How many of you watch Shark Tank? This is like one of my favorite shows on television. I can binge on Friday nights, watch about 5 episodes. And Barbara Corcoran is one of my favorites. Maybe because she's a tall blonde lady, I don't know. But she's just going to tell you what she thinks, isn't she? But do you notice, before I even go to this point, do you notice how much when they show like the case studies, how much the people she works with feel that they're appreciated by her and really mentored by her, which is another thing we're going to talk about. Well, one day I heard her interviewed, and she said, your best innovations will come from your front line. from your front line. So what does that mean? What do we have a formal method for gathering ideas and service perceptions from our front line? And really making that a very specific way, a formal way that we gather those, because it's so very important to our growth and evolving to match the needs of consumers today. And would we agree that consumers today are not the same as they were a few years ago? I mean, the generation that is coming now into the workforce and into the consuming public is completely different than what we had 20 years ago. So we have to have our ears open. And our front line many times is that same age, so they're going to be happy to tell us. And if you don't have that, what can you do tomorrow? So I'm going to ask you at your table right now, just for your organization, ask, and some of you may be managers, some of you may be the actual people who could give the input. What do you have formally right now to gather the input from your customers? And if you don't have anything, what could you do tomorrow to get it? Because we're all about action today and not just talking about things. So I want you to talk about that at your tables and say, what do we have in place right now? And if we don't have something in place, what can we do that would be really easy tomorrow to formally gather that input? Go ahead and talk with each other. Well, engaged employees do lead to engaged customers who have significant impact on our business, and I've included some on your handout. They spend more, they visit more often, they resist competitive onslaughts, they promote your brand, and they forgive your service blunders. Now, are those things that you would like to have? Absolutely. So think about what impact that has on your business. And I think that I have some, there it is right there, a statistic that engaged employees plus engaged customers can lead, through the study, show to a 240% performance boost. There are very few things you could do in business that would give anything close to that type of a result. So I do believe we maximize our customers' choices by engaging customers through engaged employees. And you'll notice I had some other statistics on your handout there. 480% more committed to helping their organization succeed. 250% more likely to recommend improvements to you, 370% more likely to recommend their company as an employer. Is it true that some of us are having a hard time finding good employees today? Yeah, it's almost like an employee's market in a lot of cases, depending on your community and what's going on. But we want to be able to get the cream of the crop. And just as the world is talking about your business on social media, guess what? Guess what your employees are doing? They're talking about you on social media. So, and of course when I'm advising employees, I'm like, it's not a very good idea. There are ways to see that. But you don't want negative things coming from employees about you. Obviously that impacts customers, but it also impacts your ability to get and retain the very best staff. One of the chapters in my book is called The Whole World is Watching, and I wanted to share this story with you because I think it really illustrates what I'm talking about. I was in a bank back when I sold checks to the banks, and I was waiting to see the new accounts representative who was with someone at the time. And you know how in banks a lot of times there's like glass offices everywhere? Well, there was a glass office, and there was, I think it said like loans on the outside, or lending, something like that. And a young lady came in, and she said, I need to know, does he have an answer for me yet on my loan? And she said, oh, just a minute, and I'll check. And she walked into this glass office, and by the way, this gentleman was not doing anything like with a customer. He was obviously working, but not doing anything with a customer. And he just went like that, shook his head, and she went out and told the lady, no, he doesn't have an answer for you yet. And I thought, that's not a really good way to do things, is it? Because perception, again, is reality from the customer's standpoint. And so this customer would be perceiving that this person isn't even going to take the time, obviously met with her before, to come out and speak to me. But then I started thinking, there's an even greater message going on here. And that was the message, or the administrative assistant seeing that is how the manager was treating a customer. So we have to think of what we show. The other story, I think we can't ever forget the impact that what our actions have, even as a coworker. You don't have to be a manager, do you? Just the fact of when you show that you're willing to go the extra mile for the customer, it really lifts others to want to do the same thing. So we have to think, who is watching us? Who sees me every day, other than customers? Who sees me internally and what I do? What do they hear me saying? How do you lead by example? It's so very important to our service perception, because you can be, even without being a manager, you can be the service leader and the mentor. And the question I'd like you to discuss at your table right now, speaking of mentor, is do you have a mentoring program in your organization for when a new person comes on? And do you let a new person be mentored by someone who is one of your service bright stars for your staff? So talk with each other real quickly of how you mentor a new person to great service. Something I wanted to share with you, have any of you heard of, it's now called ATD, it used to be called ASTD, American Societies for Training and Development. They may have a chapter here in Wichita. They do studies of like the most successful organizations. And one of the studies that I read that I found very interesting is that in companies that have a new employee orientation program, like a formal mentoring, training program, onboarding program, are the ones that are at the top of all the benchmarks. So think about that. You know, if you're a smaller organization, you might not be able to have a formal training program, but do you have documentation that shows your employees what service standards are, what is expected of them? Because the thing that we find with the newer generation coming into the workforce is some of the skills that some of us were brought up with just as kind of part of human existence are not really there anymore. And that is not a knock to that generation. We have to be careful of just, criticizing that generation, because they have some skills that we didn't have at all, right? So think, what can we do to maybe enhance the communication skills of a rising generation who is very good at electronic communication, but really has not had a lot of experience with interpersonal communication, face-to-face, and, meeting, greeting, customer type of basic skills that